rough day, folks. Welcome to Stillspeakpod. So as it turns out, they did release the cause of death for Gabrielle Petito, and that was strangulation. And shortly after the press conference, they actually disclosed in black and white that it was manual strangulation throttling, which is just another word for manual strangulation. And most of you probably heard about this by now. It's all over social media and in the actual mainstream news. And it's definitely been a rough day, very heartbreaking day. And I had a mix of different reactions to this information as the coroner was speaking. I had my first immediate initial reaction of sadness because the image of Gabby sitting in the back of the Moab, Utah police SUV, crying, puffy-eyed, distraught, very, very upset is all I could think about when he was speaking. And I did a 4-part series on the body cam where I do a whole breakdown to kind of raise awareness. It was not an attempt to attack the officers. And if you've not watched that, please go do so. I've put a lot of time into that and work, and it's got a lot of information in it. So in that video, though, I think it was either part 3 or part 4, I'm not quite sure, when we were talking about the new body cam footage, the one that came out recently, where we got a much clearer image of Gabby in the backseat of that SUV, where she's demonstrating what Brian did to her as far as grabbing her face to push her away. And when she does this demonstration, and I said this in my video, my immediate thought went to, this is how she died, because the mouth and the neck are so close to one another. And besides the fact that strangulation is intimate, and you usually see that in domestic violence and or within partners. So your significant other, fiance, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. So, even though I considered that there was all these other possibilities, I was definitely leaning towards that this was going to be a case of strangulation, which what's disturbing about that is that we kind of get a glimpse of how it went down by the way that Gabby is describing him pushing her by her mouth. Because when you pushing somebody, to grab their face is a lot more aggressive than if you would just kind of push them out of the way. Or even push them by the face, like open-handed, than to grab their face the way she demonstrated he did after the officer noticed that she had marks on her face. So I had a mixed feeling of sadness, and then I had the other feeling of just wanting to smash my head into a wall, thinking about how she died in that same manner, just by the throat. And I also felt a great deal of anger. And that anger comes from the fact that everybody has failed this girl. And I don't mean every single person, but a lot of people have failed this girl. And the first person to fail her was Brian. That girl, the way she looked at him, had that innocent 22-year-old puppy dog love, and she trusted him and wanted to be with him. I mean, she couldn't even bear the thought of being without him for the night. And she loved him. And he, at one point, proposed to this woman, and down the line would have been married to her, where he would have taken vows, in sickness and health, to death do us part, not until I kill you. So in a way, thank God, they never actually did walk down the aisle and brought children into this situation. So he broke her trust and he failed her. Moab officers, they failed her. I was very kind to the officers in my body cam footage breakdown, and my intent was not to go at them and point fingers at them. It was more so to raise awareness about domestic violence. That being said, there was failures, and one of the biggest failures was the fact that they didn't speak to both witnesses, and that there were glaring, obvious signs of her making excuses or defending him by lying. So they failed. And you know what? It doesn't have to happen again. So hopefully this ends up being something they can learn from. And so we have Brian failed her, Moab failed her, and her mother tried to file her missing on the 10th. She kind of was blown off by that, idea that her daughter was missing because her daughter's an adult and yada, 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 until she got somebody to take her seriously and filed the report on the 11th. Now, would that have changed anything? No, she was already deceased. But still, why couldn't you just file the report? Mothers know when something's not right with their child. She knew. Nicole Schmidt knew her daughter was not okay. And then you have Northport police. Okay? They definitely failed Gabby. Yeah, I understand. Brian has rights. Believe me, I am all about rights. I do a whole advocacy about rights in a specific topic. I'm all about it. Get a lawyer. Hell yeah. I'm all for getting a lawyer. Protect your rights. It's your right to remain silent. And yes, there are cases where somebody is railroaded and they didn't even commit a crime. So yes, I'm all for it. Please get a lawyer if you can afford one. Okay? But as I said in other videos, at minimum, they should have been watching him 24/7, especially since she was still missing at the point that he took off. And sometimes criminals will return to the scene of the crime, or at that point when nobody knows if she was alive or deceased, even though we did believe she was going to be deceased, he could have returned to where she is and then they would have found her possibly alive. And he was the sole person of interest. And he was the last one with her. He knew what happened to Gabby and he knew where she was. Period. And they can try to act like, oh, we're trying to follow the law. We were doing everything within the law. Our hands were tied. Oh, come on. Give me a break. Give me a break. Think about stakeouts, right? Stakeouts, you're watching people from afar. Because they were like, oh, we don't track residents. Okay, but what about stakeouts? I mean, right? You're watching people from afar. They don't even know they're persons of interest and you're watching them. So give me a break. I think that's just an excuse. And I don't think anybody else expected them to bug his phone, bug his house, or put a GPS tracker on his car. However, I think we expected you to be at least watching the house to see the coming and goings of the family. And I don't think that's asking too much, given that this circumstance was very unique and special in the sense that where she went missing and who she went with when she went missing. Because sometimes you have somebody who, is killed in their home, killed outside their work. That's a totally different circumstance. It could be anybody. But she was with him, and he's back. She's not. Her van's here, and she's not. So this is a seriously different and unique circumstance. So, yeah, I was feeling all the emotions today. And, I explained in my first series on this channel, the Summerwell series, that I'm not one that actually gets attached to victims. I just don't. I can feel sympathy and be respectful to a victim. However, in order for me to fully analyze a case, I have to remove the emotion from the equation in order to look at the facts. And I actually believe that in true crime, there's no room for emotions because it just clouds your view and judgment. And we're seeing a lot of that in this case as far as people's emotions towards the parents. So, yeah. So I'm not one that typically does get some sort of attachment to a victim. However, I'm not feeling attached to Gabby. I'm feeling a little bit more emotional about Gabby than I have in prior cases. And I can't really pinpoint why. I don't think it's because we have so many pictures and videos of her, because in other cases we had the same, but I didn't have the same feeling. I think it is this body cam footage. And the reason being is if this DV incident, this domestic violence incident happened a year ago, okay, I would have been like, okay, definitely consider it. But the fact that this incident, though, happened 15 to 18 days prior to her death, and she ends up demonstrating how he aggressively grabbed her face on camera, and we now know that he eventually, not even 3 weeks later, aggressively grabs her neck. I think that's what's making me very emotional, because I can almost envision it, and it kind of makes me sick to my stomach. But let's get to the press conference. So he went into, the cause. He couldn't get into a lot of details, which I told you last night. We're not getting the full, autopsy report. That's going to come much, much, much later, depending if there's even a trial. And, so I knew we weren't going to get that. We weren't going to get, what was her organs looking like? What were her eyes? What were this? Did she have other bruises? Were they old bruises? Were they new bruises? Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. I was actually really shocked that we're even getting the cause. And so he did confirm, however, that she was not pregnant, which was a big speculation that people had been talking about, and they were considering that might have been an actual motive, so no. And he seemed pretty certain she was not pregnant. Thank God for that, because I think that if she had been, that would have crushed her family even further. And he said that the estimated time of death was 3 to 4 weeks prior to her body being found on September 19th. And while he refused to answer any questions in relation to Brian being involved or the person who killed her, he did, however, when asked about the attention that this case has gotten, did make a statement that caught everybody's attention, which was, quote, "Unfortunately, this is one of many deaths around the country of people who were involved in domestic violence," unquote. Now, we all know that she was involved in domestic violence because we had this documented domestic violence stop on August 12th. So, yeah, she's a domestic violence victim, but he was actually even talking about death, in the sense that the context here was he was talking about domestic violence deaths. And this was most likely an oopsie of sorts. I think he felt a lot of pressure giving this press conference today due to the influx of emails and calls to his office wanting answers, and he just felt like, I have to get out there and say something so these people will leave me the hell alone, right? And he's not used to this. And he was asked so many different ways if Brian was the person who killed Gabby, and he kept, saying, I can't answer that. It's up to the FBI. I can't answer that. It's not my job. It's something, And then he kind of gets tripped up, and this is what he says. So this is, obviously a huge clue, given the context that he was discussing domestic violence deaths. And it almost felt like it was a situation of, tell me it's Brian without telling me it's Brian, right? And then he kind of says this, and it's like, oh, thanks, Mr. Coroner, man. Thank you for that little nugget of information. Because, he didn't technically say Brian's name. He referenced domestic violence, right? So that was really interesting. And people immediately, the chat that I was watching exploded. Everybody was like, oh my God, he just said domestic violence. And I mean, she was killed by somebody else, because the manner of death is homicide, right? And we now know that it's manual strangulation. So, yeah, I mean, it's violence, but domestic would mean Brian. So, I think after the fact, he was probably like, shit. But I don't think he'll get in trouble for that, just because it's something you can easily explain away as, oh, no, I just meant, you can make some kind of excuse of sorts. And he also talked about that DNA was taken from Gabby's body by the FBI. The reasons for this could be, there's several different reasons. Two that come to mind is they're going to make sure that nobody else's DNA is on her, as far as hers or his, because they were living together in this van, so their DNA is going to be on one another, or not Brian's anymore, but on Gabby's. And, you want to make sure there's no other person's DNA on there, especially if this does go to a trial, and then you have to end up explaining why this other random person's DNA is on her body when it shouldn't be. And another reason could be the contact DNA possibly found on the neck. I'm not so sure about that one because of the circumstances of how long she was outside and what her body's process had gone through, that would be able to get any type of contact DNA from her neck. But those are the only two things that come to my mind as far as the DNA is concerned. So the FBI did take that. Meaning, I don't know if they just were able to get, certain DNA from parts of the body, and not particularly the neck, due to whatever injury was done to her neck and or the decomposition of her body. Let's talk about the estimated time of death. Now, nothing's really changed as far as the timeline's concerned. This just kind of further confirms it. So we know that the FBI, after her body was found, was asking for any witnesses that saw anything between the 27th and the 30th. And we do know that on the 27th, somebody claims that they saw the couple at the Mary Piglet restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was some form of issue or altercation with the hostess and possibly Brian and Gabby was very upset. The restaurant did confirm that the couple visited the restaurant at some point. They did not, however, confirm what time, what day, or if such altercation happened. And we know the same day, a few hours later, in early evening, the vloggers caught the van on the side of the dirt road close to where her body ended up being found. The same day is when her mom, Nicole, received a text from Gabby's phone. I don't want to be specific there because we don't know who this was, calling her grandfather by his first name, which was alarming to her because she didn't typically do that. And I mean, none of us do, right? Who calls their grandparent by their first name? Nobody. You might have Grandpa Joe or Grandpa Scott, but not, you don't typically just say the first name. So the 27th is a rather big day. And, when the vlogger's video came out, so many people were zooming in on the video and trying to find all these things. And all I have to say to that is you're going to see whatever you want to see, okay? Zooming in to a blurry picture that's all pixelated, trying to, make out Gabby's face and, drawing on it to, show people what you think you see. I mean, good luck. That's what I'm going to say to that. But it's that video was important in the sense of the location of where the van was, because that's where her body ended up being. But as far as trying to make out anything in the picture, I think that's a bit of a reach. Because there's the thing, it's their van. So if you see Gabby's image in the van, if you see her hat, if you see her flip-flop, that doesn't mean anything other than, well, duh, it's their van. So of course you're going to see her, of course you're going to see a hat, of course you're going to see a book, of course you're going to see a flip-flop. And that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. It means that they were at their van because that's what they were traveling in. So I didn't really understand why people were trying to do that. I think they were kind of hoping to see a dead body in the front seat of the car all just hanging out. I don't know. It's weird. So really, even if you saw those things, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't prove that she was dead at that point. Even the part where people thought they saw the van door opening in the back, or closing, as the vloggers are driving down the road in the distance, it looks like the back door is shutting, like somebody pulled it shut. That's not even weird. Because again, if that was them in the back sleeping, they had a little bed area and they heard a car coming and they didn't like the noise and they just pulled the door shut, that's not weird. So, like, that doesn't prove, like, Brian had her dead body in the back there and he was shutting the door so they wouldn't see it. I mean, it could be that if the door is actually closing, but it doesn't mean definitively that's what it was. It could have just been they were hanging out in their van. So basically what I'm trying to say here is, like, we really don't know that the 27th is the day that she died. However, we know that she never left this spot. Once that van was in this spot, she never left it. So, at least not alive. So, I mean, they could have even been camping there the 27th, the 28th. We don't know, because we don't know what day she died. Just because it was pictured in the footage on the 27th on the side of the road, a short walking distance away from where her body was found, doesn't mean that's the day she actually ended up dying. Could have been they spent the night there and she was killed on the 28th, or they spent 2 nights there and she was killed on the 29th. We don't know. Right now, we just don't know which day she died, and there's only 3.5-ish days. So you got the 27th, the 28th, the 29th, and some of the 30th that she could have died, because at minimum, he had to leave that area by the evening of the 30th in order to make it back to Florida on the 1st at 10:26 a.m. And that's if he drove all the way through, which is possible if he was running on adrenaline and whatnot. So, this coroner's estimate of 3 to 4 weeks really doesn't change the timeline at all. It doesn't narrow it down. It just leads us right back to the days that we were already considering was the days that she could have died, based on the information we have, based on the FBI wanting witnesses from those days and everything else. So, if she was found, if you're looking at it 3 weeks prior to that, it'd bring you to the 29th of August. If it was 4 weeks prior that she died, it brings you to the 22nd. Wow, that is a heck of a plane that just flew over my house. I had to pause. So we know that she checked out and was on video leaving the Salt Lake City Hotel, the Fairfield Inn, on the 24th. We know that she spoke to her mom on the 25th. She also took that picture in Ogden in front of the butterfly mural, which was her last social media post. We know she visited that spot that day because the shop also confirmed it. Some people were thinking that it was an old picture. And on the 26th, we have several witnesses, and I've talked about them before, where they all have kind of conflicting stories, and you kind of have to pick and choose who you want to believe, because they saw this couple either together or alone. Brian was in a good mood. Brian was in a bad mood. Brian was acting strange. He was in Yellowstone. No, the couple was in Idaho. So all their statements conflict with one another, and it's really hard to believe that any of them saw the couple. Maybe just one, but all their stories can't be accurate because they can't be in all these different places. Okay, this can't be. So even if you took out the 26th, okay, and you can say, oh, maybe she died on the 26th, well, then you have to think about the 27th claim of seeing the Mary Piglet and whether or not you believe that. I believe that more than I believe the witnesses on the 26th. So again, now we're still back to the 27th, the 28th, the 29th, and half of the 30th. But it depends if you believe this Mary Piglet story. If you don't believe the Mary Piglet story, then you can also include the 26th, because technically the last time she spoke to somebody besides Brian would have been her mother on the 25th. But given the odd text that went out on the 27th and then again on the 30th, which if he had her phone, he would have been traveling at that time, it definitely seems that this, that most likely happened on the 27th. I lean more towards that, yes, she died on the 27th when the van was caught on camera. I was just saying that it's also possible that she was alive on the 27th and we just happened to see where they chose to camp that particular time, and maybe she didn't die till the next day. But this stand text to her mother, I have to agree with her mother that is very abnormal, and that definitely would have raised some red flags for me and made me very concerned. And the only reason why I just went through this timeline again, which, by the way, I do have a timeline video. Well, I have many, actually, timeline videos. I did twice the entire timeline going back to when they started the trip. But that's when we were still looking for her and trying to help. Then I did, I think, 1 or 2 where it was updated with the new information starting from August 12th. And then I did a visual timeline to some music. It's on my channel a couple days ago. It ends on October 5th. So it goes from August 12th to October 5th. And so we can kind of keep that and just keep updating it to fill in the timeline. And the reason why I just went over the timeline again is because I saw a lot of people being like, oh my God, he said 3 to 4 weeks, and 4 weeks takes you to the 22nd, and the 22nd was right after their domestic stop, which not really, it's not right after, but it's 10 days after, and so, he killed her immediately after the domestic stop. I saw somebody saying that today in the live feed. So I just wanted to remind you, remember, he didn't come back from Florida until the 23rd. They checked out of the hotel on the 24th. Our mother talked to her on the 25th. She took that last social media post picture. And then again on the 26th, we have just a bunch of random witnesses. And that's where we're at. So it still leads us back to the 27th through the 30th. And that was up until October 5th, my timeline. And the paper that the coroner released after the press conference stating that it was manual strangulation was actually dated October 5th, which means they've known about these results for about a week now, which means the FBI has known for about a week now. And so many people are like, oh, is this coroner's press conference mean that we're not going to see an arrest warrant for Brian? Well, the FBI has known for over a week. Have you seen an arrest warrant? So, no. Or at least not one that we know about. They could possibly have one sitting and waiting for him, but as far as we know, no, they don't. And you have to remember that they have 180 days to go to hearings and trial, so they need to find Brian first before doing such, so that they don't run out of time. So it makes sense that they're not doing that just yet. Now, let's kind of talk about, and this, you can skip this part if you want to, it won't be long. I'm going to briefly just kind of go over what happens to the body within a certain amount of days. So from 0 to 72 hours after death, you have rigor mortis, your temperature drops, and you have cell death. It's 3 to 10 days after death. You have skin discoloration, bloating, and liquid discharge. This is when the body starts to change all different colors once the heart stops pumping and the blood is no longer circulating. And then 10 to 25 days after death, his skin blackens, there's a strong odor, and you have lost almost all liquids. 25 to 60 days after death, you lose hair and nails. They start to break down, loss of soft tissue, and bones start to be exposed. Now, these ranges of days, like I said, 25 to 60 days, it's because of factors like the elements and the weather and such. So you have to take all those things into account. Was the body buried? Was it out in the open? Was there animals in the area? What kind of bugs were there, and so much more. And I know that's really gross and nasty stuff, but I mean, that's just reality, okay? So, he said 3 to 4 weeks, so roughly 21 days to 28 days is in the stage that she was in. And so that brings you to, skin blackening, the strong odor, loss of liquids, and you start to lose soft tissue, and hair and nails break down. So, I mean, she was in rough shape. There's no other way to put that, okay? She was in really rough shape, and the weather out in Teton has an average of like mid-70s during the day, gets really chilly at night. In August, and then in September, it says like the highs are in the mid-60s, dropping down, obviously, at night. So her body went through kind of a range of different temperatures too while out there. And I can only imagine the different types of bugs in Grand Teton, which, yuck. Now, as far as strangulation, so this is, sorry, it's just I'm kind of lost of words, because strangulation is such a brutal way to die. Anything that constricts your breathing like that is just so much suffering, and it's just awful. When somebody shoots you, okay, and if they shoot you straight in the head, you instantly die, you have no suffering. If they stab you and they stab you in the right spot, like the heart or the lungs or a specific artery, and you instantly die, there's no suffering. There's no good way to die, right? Obviously, there's no good way to die, especially not a good way to be murdered. However, strangulation is just freaking brutal. It's just brutal. And some of the things that happen during that period of time while that person is literally choking the air out of you is you get bloodshot eyes, your eyelids can swell, your face can swell, your lip can swell, your tongue can swell, you might have some bleeding from the ear, you might get a bloody nose, and obviously you're going to have some skin discoloration. If you've ever seen a child choking, they start to change color pretty quickly while they're trying to catch their breath, but something is lodging, and they can't. So it's again, brutal. And the person who's killing that person, depending on how they did it, if they're coming from the front to the sides of the neck, coming forward at them, they're looking in their face and they're seeing this. They're seeing their eyes. They're seeing them gasping for air. They're seeing their face swell up, possibly blood dripping from their nose. And yet they continue. But here's the most disturbing part of this story to me. Brian, alright, allegedly Brian, I'll play along here, saw her in that way. This beautiful girl saw her that way. And he leaves. And 10 days later, roughly, give or take, depending, either 10 days or 7 days. So anywhere from 7 to 10 days later, this dude is mowing his lawn, allegedly, riding his bike with his mom, allegedly, and going camping with his family where he ate s'mores around a freaking campfire and where he posed in a picture with his young nephews with his arms wrapped around them, acting like he's just your regular old Joe family man camping. That's a wee bit psychotic, in my opinion. Just a little bit. Now, I would feel a little bit differently about this in the sense that some sense of remorse. What do I mean by that? Listen, it's so much, I said this in another case, okay? It's much easier to understand as human beings two people in a romantic relationship, whether it's boyfriend, girlfriend, fiance, husband, wife, where you can actually know how it escalates to the point that someone kills another one, okay? I'm not saying that we all want to kill our spouse. What I'm saying is it's easy to see how that happens. It's not easy to see when somebody kills a child. You're like, how did you kill this child? It's not the same as you understand it more if it's a romantic relationship, okay? And so because you can understand it, you can see how it unfolds. You're screaming at one another. Maybe somebody throws something at somebody else or pushes one, another pushes, and then things just escalate, and then boom, right? It just happens. You're in this heat of the moment, anger, rage, resentment, whatever the case may be, and it takes you to that point. But this is why you actually often see a murder-suicide type of situation, because at that point, once it's done, it's almost this moment of realization, like, oh shit, what the hell did I just do? You know, it went too far, and you feel that sense of remorse, and you end up taking your own life, okay? Because you just cannot live with what you've done, and you definitely don't want to go to jail. That's another thing. And he could have killed himself out there. He could have. There was a man who was found not long after Gabby, who had been missing, who was found not far from where she was found, and his autopsy result was he committed suicide. So he could have definitely killed himself out there, no doubt. He could have even killed himself on the way home, jumped in front of a car. Easy. I don't care. Jump off a bridge. I'm sure he crossed many bridges on his route home. And so, you know, obviously he didn't do that. So there wasn't a moment of, oh my God, I just killed this woman that I freaking love and I can't believe it. No, this dude gets in a freaking car in a van that's hers, uses her credit card, touching all her stuff in the van, what she set up in the van, her stuff. This person that you just spent the last 2 months in this van with is not next to you, and you take off and you're leaving this place without her, and you were able to sit in that car for 35 to 36 hours, and when you get home, you still don't have a moment of, oh my God, I have to freaking tell somebody. No. What you do is you go camping and you eat freaking s'mores. And then not even a week later, you're like, peace out, Mom and Dad. Or if they're involved, we don't know. But bye. And you just take off. It's psychotic. It comes across like this dude had a screw loose. It really does. And I still keep going back to this domestic incident because I said this multiple times. I'm going to say it again because that's what I do. He had that report from Utah showing he was the victim. That was documented. He knew it was documented too. They took pictures of his wounds, for God's sake, which just infuriates me. And he could have easily called the police after it was said and done. He could have easily freaking called them and said, oh my God, I just killed my girlfriend. There's a domestic incident on file. We just had an incident 2 weeks ago. I was the victim. It would have been like the best defense for him. The best defense. And I said in another video, there are some defendants who wished that they had a defense like that. It was like basically handed to him on a silver platter and he didn't take it. Sorry, I'm getting a little worked up. It just... But anyways, point being is the idea this guy is out of the campground with other families, with his sister and her husband and their kids, sitting around a campfire, fire that you once shared with Gabby, and you're eating s'mores and having dinner. Like, oh, hey Cassie, how's work? What? According to the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, nearly 4 in 5 victims of strangulation are strangled manually, and almost all, or 97% of strangulation involves blunt force trauma, which makes sense because they're being abused prior and the person is trying to gain control over you and power over you, and so then it turns into strangulation, which is a huge control and power tactic because it's basically taking control of your breath. It is. That's what it is. So it's a way to just take control of that situation. Strangulation is just so intimate. It's just so intimate. And it breaks my heart to think this young girl thought this man was like her man, this guy she's gonna travel the country with and eventually marry one day. And she was there being choked, knowing who's choking her, knowing that the person that she loved was ending her life. And she most likely went unconscious very quickly. But she didn't know she was never going to come out of that being unconscious. So that was her last vision, was this man that she wanted to share her life with, killing her. Now, with strangulation, it sounds like, well, put your hands out, okay? Surely everybody's made the hand movement of choking someone before, but put your hands out, have your thumbs touch one another, okay? And kind of cup your hands, and that's how you can kind of envision how this was done. From the front and the sides, fingers on the side of the neck, and whatnot, okay? And it sounds like, you just grab the person's neck and you just kind of squeeze. There's a certain level of pressure that needs to be applied. And different sites say different things. Some say it's about 35 pounds of pressure that's needed. But depending on where your hand ends up being, and if it's on the carotid, if it's the carotid artery, then it only needs about 6 to 11 pounds. Again, that varies depending on who you're looking up. I looked this up in other cases. I'm like, all right, you guys are all saying something different. So anyways, it's a range, 6 to 11 pounds of pressure. And in most strangulation cases, not all, typically it breaks the high bone. So that's one indicator that it's strangulation by hands, because you actually end up breaking the bone in the neck. And you definitely get some bruising, some red marks, depending how much force you will actually see the actual fingers on the neck. And the biggest thing here is that, again, depends what site you look up. Everybody gives a different amount of time, but some say 10 seconds, some say 20, some say 30, some say a minute. You go unconscious rather quickly, which means that the person then continues to strangle you for another 2 to 4 minutes after you've already went unconscious to kill you, because strangulation takes 3 to 5 minutes to fully kill a person. So that makes it even more sick, right? Because you've already taken control over that person. You have the power over that person. That person's now unconscious, which means they're no longer fighting back, and they're kind of limp, right? Because you're unconscious. And you continue to squeeze their neck. Now, time goes by fast, right? A whole day can go by. You're like, what the hell even happened today? I don't know. Went by in 2 seconds, especially in my life. I have multiple kids. I homeschool. I do this. I have a husband. I have a life. So, some days it's like a blur. I like, what even happened today? I did so much. But when you actually sit and look at a clock, it's a whole nother story. I mean, think about if you're at work. 8 hours when you're at home flies in 2 seconds. 8 hours of work, you feel like you've been there for 3 days, right? Same thing with minutes. If you're sitting waiting for something and you actually looking at the clock and you see it tick, 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 you're like, oh my God, come on, right? It's just so slow because you're actually watching it. So you think, 3 to 5 minutes isn't so long. No, it's really long. No, it's really, really long. Even if it's, because again, each expert says something different. Let's just say it takes 30 seconds to go unconscious, because apparently nobody seems to know the exact amount of time. Even that 30 seconds, pull out your phone, pull up your stop clock, and watch 30 seconds. And see how long it takes. It's awful. And that person knows what you're doing to them while that clock is ticking. Now, due to the fact that you can go unconscious so quickly, depending on how much pressure is being applied, where the person's hands are placed, and all that, okay? I've only seen one case of strangulation in all my years following true crime where the victim did not have any defense wounds, and it did not appear as though they fought back. When that case was going on, many victims of domestic violence who had been strangled and survived talked about there not being enough time to fight back. Now, they might fall in the category of it only took 10 to 30 seconds because there's certain factors at play here. But typically, from the research that I was looking up when we were doing that case, is that it is human nature to defend yourself in this situation because you're being restricted of air. And so instinctively you start to want to get air, right? So you're going to try to grab the person's hands off. You usually can see wounds on the person's hands that were choking the victim, or around their wrist because of the way the person tries to grab them. That being said, sometimes they'll pin the victim down, so they'll use knees and hold their hands down so they can't actually fight back. But women specifically will scratch. They'll try to poke eyes. They'll kick. They'll try to knee the male in the area, if you get what I'm trying to say here. Because you're instinctively, you want to get that air, and so you're going to automatically put up a fight. If you're unconscious, though, you can't. So, we don't know if Gabby put up a fight. And even though strangulation takes 3 to 5 minutes, we don't know what was happening prior to that. Meaning, did he start choking her and she was able to break free, and then he started choking her again, making it, more like 7 to 9 minutes? We don't know. We don't know any of that. We don't know if she tried to fight back. Given that she clawed her way into the van after he locked her out, I'm going with Gabby tried her hardest to stop him. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. I'm not saying that's fact. I don't know, so don't go around now saying that. But if I had to make a guess, I definitely think that she did. There's no good way to die. Like I said, it's just not. There's no good way to be murdered. But strangulation just seems to be so god-awful. And not only that, but to be strangled by somebody who you loved. And to look at them in the eyes like, what are you doing to me right now? Who are you? That feeling it's awful, guys. It's just heartbreaking. There's no way around it. This girl was 22 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She'd never been married. She never had her own children. She didn't finish seeing all the places she wanted to go. She had a vision and a goal, and she was taken away. She was taken away. And to apply that much pressure to somebody, it's just, there had to be a level of rage. There had to be a level of anger. There had to be some sort of possible resentment maybe, but definitely rage. There had to be a moment where you were just so full of rage to pull that off, to do that fully through without stopping at all and considering what you were doing. Even if she got to the point that she passed out, that you allow her to come back to consciousness. Given the DV stop in August, she probably wouldn't have done anything about it. And that's the sad truth. She most likely would have never told anybody what he did. And I can't remember if I said this already or not, because I had recorded half of this and then I had an issue, so I had to start over again. So forgive me if I already said this. But what I had said was that in another case, there was a prosecutor who described premeditated murder. And he used an example that I thought was really easy to understand for a lot of people, and so it stuck with me. A lot of times people think that premeditated murder means planned, meaning the day prior, a couple of hours prior, a week prior, they made some sort of plan to do this. He described it as basically the intent, willful and intent. So he gave an example of if you're driving down the road and you're coming up on a light that's about to turn red, and if you take those few seconds or the split second to contemplate and think in your mind, I'm going to go or I'm not going to go, and you decide to go, that was intent because you had time to think about it and stop, and you didn't. So when it comes to strangulation, because of the length of time, now this prosecutor was on a case that involved strangulation, so this is why he was describing it this way, was that you have at least at minimum 3 minutes before that person ends up dying. Tops 5-6 minutes depending, okay? And in that period of time, you had time to think about what you were doing, therefore stop, and you didn't. Making it worse is that person goes unconscious, means that you've already gained control over that person, and you still continued. And I heard Dog the Bounty Hunter talking about, like, he was trying to shut her up. I can think this is his speculation based upon the DV incident, that he was possibly trying to get her to shut up, and so this is what he did. Those weren't his exact words, but I think that's what he was trying to imply. But I'm only bringing that up because, well, once you have her down and you have her unconscious, then you now have the control. But you continued. You saw her face changing, her eyes going bloodshot, her nose possibly bleeding, blood possibly coming from her ears, her face swelling, her lips swelling, and you still continued. But in a blind fit of rage, it's called blind rage, blind. You just get into this tunnel vision, so to speak, and you basically lose all control of your body, and it is what it is, and that's why there's definitely some form of massive anger towards somebody to do such a thing, that you wanted to do this to the point of taking the breath out of them. And the question here is, what would make him so angry? What was it? You have the freedom, you're adults, you're out in this van together. What was there to argue about, really, besides just being annoyed with each other? And I'll put it in Brian's words, a lot of little things. Like she doesn't like where you put your socks, or that your feet are dirty, or you left your book out, which is normal, typical relationship nonsense, right? So what could have made you so freaking angry? What was it? We don't know. A lot of quote-unquote little things don't lead to you strangling this girl to death. So, I'd be really interested to know what the FBI has as far as a motive's concerned. Because, yeah, we can sit here and say this was a snap situation and they were arguing, but really, what could they possibly be arguing about that led to her death? Did he think she was cheating? Was she accusing him of cheating? Was it something money related? Who knows? Now, the audacity to do this to this girl, and then to take her credit card and her van and her stuff that's in the van, and to get in that car and go withdraw her money and drive your ass back to Florida? Are you freaking kidding me? That's why I go back to, this guy just might be a psycho. This just might have been a case of who knows what diagnosis, multiple personality disorder, possibly he'd strangled her before. I don't know. I'm not going to diagnose a guy I don't even know. But sure as hell comes across crazy as hell to me. And no, I'm not saying that people with multiple personality disorders are crazy. I'm just saying it comes across cuckoo crazy that this dude went and was sitting around a campfire with his family eating s'mores after all this, after taking this girl's van money and killing her. For freak's sake. And I'm just going to address a few comments that I've seen. I've seen somebody saying that they think that she was killed either in the van or near the van, and he dragged her to the location she was at. And somebody was like, do you know how hard it is to move a dead body to football fields? Well, here's the thing. You're thinking it in the context of him being totally normal. But after something like that, your adrenaline is going, and you go into a survival mode type of situation, and you almost become like He-Man or like the Hulk, and you can lift and do just about anything at that point because you're so hopped up on that adrenaline, and you're not really thinking, you're just kind of doing. And so yeah, it is actually possible that he was able to get her out to that location from the van. He could have wrapped her in a tarp and pulled the tarp. He could have wrapped her in a blanket and pulled a blanket, which would have made it a lot easier to drag her. So no, that's not out of the realm of possibility there at all. It's actually really possible. That being said, though, they might have been able to find some sort of drag marks out there, but it had been almost a month at that point when they found her, so it's possible the drag marks would no longer be there. It kind of depend on the elements and the weather. And a lot of people are saying, DNA found in her body wouldn't really matter because they lived together. And yeah, I said that earlier. However, the contact DNA on the actual neck where the bruising and wounds were, or close to where possibly if her high bone was broken or her carotid, then it's a little bit of a different story, and it could be brought up in the trial his DNA was on her neck, yes, they were living together, but here's where we found it. So where does this go from here? Well, the investigation is still ongoing, and they'll continue doing what they're doing. They have to cross their T's and dot their I's, and some of the reports are just now coming back, especially forensic. It takes some time. But without Brian, as far as this moving forward, we're kind of sort of at a standstill until he's found, and I still don't know how this is going to go down, or if it's ever going to go down. And we're just going to have to wait and see. This only further gives us a little bit more of a clue or an insight to what possibly happened. For me, honestly, it just leaves more questions than it does anything, because, yeah, it helps to have that information. We can kind of theorize and speculate and analyze, but at the same time, I want to know all of it, because that's what I do. I want to know the answers to everything. So I want to know, did she fight back? Did she have prior wounds? And that would be huge if she had prior wounds. And was there more than one possible cause, and they needed to do a further inspection to make sure which one it was? So yeah, I have a lot of questions now because of this. And thanks to this information, I now can't get the thought out of my head of her being strangled. And thank you to the Moab, Utah body camera for ruining that for me, because now all I see is her demonstrating that face grab. And I'm still highly bothered that they didn't deem that as aggressive and deem that more of a defense type of way. No. Shoving, pushing by the shoulder, the arm, whatever, fine. defense, trying to get away from them. Grabbing somebody's face, not defense. Sorry, no. And for all those people out there, and there's a lot of them, who think that they were both toxic and that Gabby had her own host of issues, and the reason and the only reason that they're saying this is because they're taking the body cam footage at face value. They're looking at that body cam footage and they're saying, well, she admitted to hitting him and he had marks, so therefore she was aggressive, and, you know, this is why he was defending himself, and so they were both toxic together and she was just as abusive. That's why they're saying that. And that comes from a lack of knowledge about domestic abuse. And if they didn't take the video at face value and weren't just listening to what she was saying, but trying to understand why she was saying those things, okay, that changes it. And you better understand it. But to all those people, even if Gabby was what you think she was, okay, even if that's the case, and even if, let's say they got into an argument and she started slapping him, okay? And they were out in this big open field. This is what's kind of crazy. So if she was killed out at the site, it was this big open area, okay? So this whole idea that he was trying to paint in the DV incident, like with the van, he's like, oh, let's take a walk, and, you know, take a break from one another. He could have easily walked away from her out there where the crime scene was or where her body was found. No questions about it. Could have easily walked away from her. No need to push her. No need to slap her. No need to punch her. No need to grab her by her face. Just walk away from her. And even if she ran up behind him and jumped on him, he could have gotten back up because she's 105 pounds and he could have continued walking. He could have walked back to their van, got in that van, and took off. Instead, if what you think happened and she was attacking him, he ends up choking her to death. That's not a defense move. Just like grabbing her face wasn't a defense move. It wasn't. That's not defense. That's rendering somebody unconscious and then completely dead. So, I'm curious what you people who believe that Gabby was just as abusive and toxic, what you think about the autopsy results and the fact that he strangled her to death. Just curious. So I'm going to end on that note. I actually went a lot longer than I wanted to. You can probably tell in my voice that I'm just feeling a little aggravated. There's a hint of sarcasm here at the end, a little bit of anger. We've been following this case nonstop since the 14th. I think my first video was on the 14th. And there's been a lot. Up and down, some days nothing at all. And to get to this point now that we now know how this girl died, this beautiful girl's face that we've seen a billion times at this point, and to know how she died, it's just really not only heartbreaking, but infuriating because he's still out there. And so I'm coming across annoyed. I'm getting tired and I'm frustrated. That being said, I'm not her parent, so you can only imagine how they're feeling. Oh my God, I don't even know how it would be. I'd want everybody's head on a damn platter who failed my child. And fast. At least I think that's what I'd want. It would depend, because I don't know for sure unless I'm in that situation, but you get what I mean. So on that note, I don't have any other updates other than the autopsy. And knowing myself, because this came out at 2:30 on my time, and then by the time it was done, and I was listening to some lives, and I was reading some of the chat, even though the chats were going freaking insane. Like I couldn't even keep up with the comments. And then I have a life, so I had to make dinner and get everybody off to sleep and laundry. And during all that, I was processing it before I came to you with this video, because I don't like to just come here and just start talking and not have any guidance. So I was really trying to think of what I wanted to talk about, and I took some notes down and what have you. It still wasn't enough time for me to fully process all of my thoughts. So don't be surprised if I bring this up again tomorrow after I've gotten some sleep and I had more time to process it even further. And I may end up bringing it up again tomorrow. So we'll see. Until next time, I'll see you soon.